I was catching up with an old colleague recently whose company, a massive century-old institution, had just spectacularly collapsed into bankruptcy. The news was painting it as the sudden catastrophic shock, a black swan event that nobody saw coming. But as we sat there, he told me the moment he knew it was over wasn't when the bank seized the accounts last week. It was actually 3 years ago, involving something as mundane as the office elevator. He described the scene vividly. The main elevator in the lobby broke down. At first, management put up a polite, printed, out-of-order sign, standard stuff. But then a week went by. Then a month. Eventually, the sign fell off and someone just slapped a piece of masking tape over the call button with "Use stairs" scrawled in Sharpie. He watched these senior executives, people managing millions of dollars, walking past that tape every single morning. They were climbing 4 flights of stairs, winded and sweating in their expensive suits, yet acting like this was completely normal. No one called a technician, no one demanded a fix. They just silently adjusted to the dysfunction. That image stuck with me. To the outside world, the tipping point was the bankruptcy filing. But inside, the system had reached its limit the moment the people in charge stopped trying to fix the cracks and started accepting the decay. It made me realize that we often look for the loud explosion to tell us the system is failing, but the real signal is usually the quiet, comfortable denial that precedes it. It begs the question, if we're just learning to live with the broken parts, are we actually surviving, or are we just waiting for the inevitable crash?
That image it's just so perfect, the masking tape sign. It's not just about denial, it's about a fundamental failure of stewardship.
Stewardship, that's a great word for it.
Yeah, I mean, the system really hits its limit when leadership stops doing that proactive work, the maintenance, the fixing. They just start accommodating the decay. And once denial becomes your default policy, failure isn't a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.
And that's exactly the core idea we're getting into in this deep dive. We want to look past that moment of quiet denial and really explore what the true measure of a healthy system is.
Right. Is it just avoiding the crash? Or is it something else?
Exactly. Is it about whether we're actively designing and building functional alternatives before the crisis forces our hand?
Yeah.
It's the difference between reacting to a bankruptcy filing and, preemptively restructuring your entire organization.
And we found some really compelling documentation of these strategies, these active design strategies, across 3 different layers of systemic challenge.
Okay, so let's lay those out.
First, we'll start with the failure of internal organizational systems. So the slow motion collapse of workplaces, of corporate cultures.
The personal level, where we feel it every day.
Precisely. Then we scale up to the failure of the big ones, the macro systems. We're going to use global health infrastructure as our main example there.
And finally,
we look at the most radical step. This is the rise of what you could call community-led alternatives. I mean, these are people who are literally designing stateless, resilient societies from the ground up because the larger government system has completely failed them.
The uniting idea here feels really powerful. That true progress belongs to the builders, to the people who are willing to design and implement new models, while everyone else is still just arguing about why the old one is broken.
Yes, and at that point, things like ethical leadership, human-centered innovation, community resilience, they stop being these, nice-to-have buzzwords on a corporate retreat poster.
They become survival tools.
They become foundational survival tools for that inevitable moment of handoff from what is failing us to what can actually finally serve us.
So let's start there, at that personal level. What happens inside the companies where we spend most of our lives? Yeah. When we talk about systemic decay, the workplaces, it's so often the canary in the coal mine, right? That's where you see the earliest cracks showing up.
Oh, absolutely. It manifests as that slow erosion of trust and culture that just fuels chronic burnout. It's subtle, but it's constant.
And it's deeply felt.
It's incredibly profound. We've seen some rich testimony on how this decay is actually experienced by employees. And it's that feeling, as one person put it, of having the best part of you sucked out by a toxic environment.
Wow.
Yeah. An environment that just demands sacrifice, but offers zero support in return. And look, this isn't just about being overworked. It's about a total lack of investment in people.
So it's about stifled growth.
That's the core of it. The decay is directly tied to stifled professional growth. You see those crucial learning and development opportunities get denied, usually because of, cynical funding constraints. It's the tale as old as time in business budgeting.
Cut the training budget first. It's the easiest line item to slash.
Easiest thing to cut. And it's the ultimate short-term mindset, isn't it? Believing you can just freeze all investment in your human capital and that the system will just run indefinitely on its existing momentum?
It never works. And the consequence, as we all know, is immediate. Deep disengagement sets in.
And productivity just drops off a cliff. People clock out mentally, months, sometimes years, before they actually hand in their resignation.
We often make the mistake of seeing well-being as this purely individual thing, like, is this one employee stressed? But the research seems to point somewhere else.
It's decisive on this. Well-being is intrinsically collective. If the person sitting next to you is frustrated, if they're stressed, if their development is being actively held back, that frustration, it spills over. It directly impacts your abilities to thrive.
So one person's stress can drain the energy of the whole team.
The whole organizational collective. Which means denying these systemic issues, it becomes a shared liability. Dysfunction is contagious.
Okay, so if that slow, creeping decay is the problem, what is the proactive design mandate for an organization that actually wants to survive, especially with the demographic shifts we know are coming?
The time frame really gives us a sense of urgency here. I mean, by 2034, we're going to see a massive generational shift. A whole new generation is going to make up the bulk of the workforce.
And their expectations are different.
Radically different. The sources are crystal clear on this. For organizations to attract and keep this talent, the entire terms of engagement have to change. Things like well-being, belonging, trust. They're going to shift from being, aspirational suggestions
to non-negotiable requirements.
Exactly. This isn't just some corporate social responsibility initiative anymore. It's a structural requirement for your own operational stability.
So the market itself is providing the incentive. If you can actually eliminate that psychological dread, the infamous Sunday scaries,
right,
and you meaningfully decrease burnout, the return isn't just, oh, we have a happier workforce. It's a hard, quantifiable outcome.
It is. You see a marked increase in job performance, in your capacity for innovation, and in organizational loyalty. It is the solid business case for operating ethically.
But the real test of that ethical leadership, and therefore the organization's resilience, it often comes when some big external shock hits, right? A technological shock. That's when the broken contract is forced out into the open.
Precisely. Which brings us to this fascinating case study of the legacy automotive manufacturer facing rapid automation.
Okay, so set the scene for us.
We're talking about massive technological disruption. Robotic arms are coming in to replace human welders. It's a shock factor that traditionally leads to one thing:
mass anxiety and mass layoffs.
The traditional response is always fear, rumors, and then the swift breaking of that unspoken social contract that promised job security. The collapse begins with layoffs to protect the bottom line. But the division head in this particular Stuttgart manufacturer, he recognized that this was the very broken model that leads to that broken elevator moment.
So he did something different.
He implemented what you can only call a truly ethical design solution. He made a critical distinction. He refused to protect the jobs.
Because the jobs were obsolete.
They were demonstrably obsolete. But, and this is the key, he fiercely protected the people.
Protecting the people sounds great on a mission statement, but how do you actually execute that? How do you do it without bleeding cash? What was the actual mechanism for that transformation?
The mechanism was a combination of radical transparency and a heavy direct investment in human adaptability. The leader was blunt. He told them the old jobs are gone.
No sugarcoating.
None. But instead of termination letters, he mandated and funded an internal Future Skills Academy. And this wasn't just some general, online training scheme. It was a targeted, human-centered design strategy.
So what did that look like in practice?
They took welders' employees whose skills were highly physical, highly specialized, and they transformed them. They turned them into robot technicians, into data supervisors, into preventative maintenance experts for the brand new automated systems.
So they realized the core skill wasn't just welding. It was mechanical aptitude. It was institutional knowledge. And they just redirected that aptitude toward the new tech.
Exactly. They recognized the inherent transferable value that was already in their workforce. The curriculum was designed specifically around robotics maintenance, predictive data analytics for machine performance, systems oversight, and that single action transformed what would have been a catastrophic organizational collapse.
The bankruptcy filing.
The equivalent of it, yes. It turned it into a proactive systemic revitalization. And it was all based on the principles of adaptability and trust. The ethical approach wasn't a cost center, it was the foundation of their survival.
And this proactive approach, it sounds like it's leveraging a very specific set of tools. It sounds a lot like design thinking.
It absolutely does. Design thinking, or DT, is fast becoming this indispensable tool set for complex organizational transformation.
Why is it so effective?
Because it forces change, not through some top-down decree, but through creative, participative activities. It demands empathy. It demands a holistic perspective on the challenge. You have to see the person, not just the job title.
But how does DT actually build resilience? I mean, is it just about better brainstorming sessions?
It's much more strategic than that. The core methodology of DT, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test it, fosters radical agility. By constantly prototyping and testing solutions quickly, companies build this inherent flexibility, this adaptability to resist major market risks, megatrends like digitalization.
And it forces a shift in mindset for leadership.
A total shift. It promotes future-oriented, long-term strategic planning. This requires leaders to stop just administering the present, managing the quarterly budget. They have to start working for the future, actively designing the capacity of the system 5 years from now.
Which immediately challenges that short-term profit obsession that leads to the decay and denial in the first place. What about the impact on corporate hierarchy, on democratization?
A profound impact. DT, by its nature, necessitates a horizontal and truly participative style of leadership. If you're going to empathize and ideate effectively, you have to flatten the structure.
So leaders have to change their role.
Drastically. They are no longer commanders. They have to become a coach, a moderator, a servant, or a provider of resources and space. And this actively challenges these deeply entrenched, long-lasting hierarchies, especially in more conservative places like family-owned small and medium enterprises or SMEs.
This sounds a lot like the concept of connectivist leadership. How does the digital age kind of supercharge this flattened democratic structure?
Connectivist leadership is really the realization of DT principles, but enabled by technology. When you have a truly networked organization using shared platforms, instant communication, it allows for shared decision-making, distributed knowledge, and constant collaboration.
So you move away from that 20th century model.
Fundamentally, you move away from the model where leadership is this singular source of power and authority. The digital interconnection isn't just about speed or efficiency. It's an enforcement mechanism for democracy. You simply cannot hoard information or centralize authority effectively if knowledge is instantly distributed across a network.
So the technology itself forces the ethical structure. That's a powerful idea. But let's push back on this a bit. This transformation model, the Future Skills Academy, it requires heavy funding. Is this ethical leadership model only really viable for a multi-billion-dollar giant like that auto manufacturer? Can a smaller SME with limited capital actually afford this kind of ethical buffer?
That's the critical challenge. And the sources do acknowledge this affordability hurdle. The principle protecting people over jobs is universal. But the implementation has to be different. For an SME, the academy might be replaced by, say, aggressive partnerships with local technical colleges.
Or subsidized time off for external certifications.
Exactly. The core requirement, though, remains the same. The SME has to invest some capital, even if it's limited, in upskilling. If they just lay everyone off, they lose all that institutional knowledge, they face huge recruitment costs later, and they destroy their reputation for future hiring. The ethical investment, even if it's smaller, still serves as a long-term survival strategy. It reduces future risk.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the bigger picture, the larger societal perspective? Design thinking is clearly great for agility and business viability, but is it actually serving the necessary long-term goals of the planet?
And that's where we see a significant gap. A major one. While DT is a powerful tool, and it can foster socio-ecological transformation, meaning it can integrate environmental and social goals right into the business model, the reality is that most companies use it primarily for short-term economic viability.
So for business agility.
Right. The broader societal goals, like achieving true net zero or addressing profound income inequality, they often remain secondary to the immediate business focus. Companies are using this powerful tool to fix the elevator for themselves, but they're often completely ignoring the crumbling infrastructure of the street outside their building.
So the microsystem, the corporation, is still struggling with denial, still prioritizing short-term gains. How does that denial scale up when we start looking at vast, failing macro systems, like, say, global healthcare?
Well, the principle of quiet decay is it's perfectly replicated at that macro level. You see it in healthcare systems all across the developed world. The story of that London charge nurse describing stretched waiting times, that was so telling.
It wasn't because of malice or even a lack of resources, but because the underlying administrative infrastructure just couldn't handle modern patient volume.
It's the infrastructure equivalent of that broken elevator. just with infinitely higher stakes. The paper-based referral systems, the siloed data, they were all built for a 20th century population structure, a 20th century technological landscape.
So the slow erosion was happening silently for years, masked by the sheer dedication of the frontline workers.
Until the loud explosion. The COVID-19 pandemic. It forced everyone to see the masking tape sign. It didn't create the cracks in the system. It just ruthlessly exposed three massive pre-existing vulnerabilities that had been normalized for decades.
Okay, let's detail that first major crack. Underpreparedness. What does the data actually tell us about that lack of foresight?
The lack of preventative investment is, frankly, staggering. Across all OECD countries in 2019, just 2.7% of total health spending went to prevention.
2.7%.
That's it. So when a highly transmissible virus hit, the pre-existing health of the population instantly became this massive liability. We found that the high prevalence of chronic diseases, 35% of the population over 16 had long-standing health problems, dramatically increased morbidity and mortality.
And the crisis amplified existing inequalities.
Brutally. The data shows that the relative risk of dying from COVID-19 literally doubled for people living in the most socially deprived areas compared to the least.
So the failure to invest in population health wasn't just a missed opportunity. It directly compounded the crisis for the most vulnerable.
Precisely. And that leads to the second major crack, which was being understaffed. The capacity of the system, it wasn't constrained by hardware, by hospital beds. It was constrained by human endurance.
The workforce.
Frontline workers were completely exhausted. It led to intense concern about a coming exodus from nursing and care professions. Our estimates show that even with current staffing levels, we might need over 3 million additional health and long-term care workers globally just to build adequate resilience for the next shock.
So the workforce was the weak link, and the system just denied that weakness until it snapped.
Right. The core finding is that staff availability and retention proved to be the single most binding constraint on the system's ability to scale up its response. And the third vulnerability was about information flow, or rather, the lack of it.
Fragmented data.
The ultimate administrative paralysis. Before the crisis, digital infrastructure was just a patchwork quilt. Consider this. Only 14 OECD countries had the digital capacity to reliably link data across different healthcare settings.
So linking a hospital record with a primary care visit.
Or long-term care facilities. And key information you need for real-time decisions like mortality rates was slow to emerge. Only 2 countries even reported weekly mortality data before the pandemic. So you have leaders forced to make life and death decisions based on incomplete, lagging, or siloed information.
It's the definition of operating a 21st century emergency with 20th century tools.
It is. So the lesson is clear. Recognizing these vulnerabilities demands a cohesive, forward-looking policy framework, one that's designed for resilience.
So what are the proactive design strategies we need to anticipate future shocks? Not just pandemics, but things like climate change impacts or antimicrobial resistance.
Well, the sources outline a pretty comprehensive reform framework with 6 policy pillars. We can focus on the 4 most transformative ones. The core mandate here is to anticipate not just the next virus, but these complex, diffuse threats. Like you said, antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, where common infections just become untreatable, or the demographic shifts that are going to strain elder care.
So let's start with policy 1, promoting population health. How do we get past that dismal 2.7% preventative spending number?
Well, the investment here has to be seen as non-negotiable, and it's highly cost-effective. The strategy is simple. Maximize people's health before crisis to minimize the damage during the shock.
Which means strengthening primary care access.
Universally, it's the front door to the whole system. But even more importantly, it means tackling the wider social determinants of poor health, the issues that predispose people in deprived areas to greater risk in the first place.
So it's about cross-sector policy, addressing poverty, unemployment, substandard housing.
Educational attainment. It's recognizing that health is fundamentally rooted outside the hospital walls. It's a systemic shift from just treating sickness to building comprehensive community health.
Which leads directly to policy 2, based on that weakness we identified, workforce investment.
Absolutely. Since the staff are the key constraint, the policy has to explicitly prioritize retention and recruitment. And that means moving beyond just, platitudes and applause.
To concrete measures.
Concrete measures. Better pay, improved working conditions, real professional development pathways that recognize and explicitly value frontline workers, especially nurses and long-term care staff who are so often marginalized despite carrying the greatest burden.
And Policy 3 is about fixing that information paralysis, data, and digital infrastructure. How do we lock in the gains we made during the crisis for the long term?
The mandate is to integrate those fragmented data systems. We have to ensure that linked data and timely reporting are the standard, not the emergency exception. And the critical element here is to extend data collection beyond just the clinical health sector.
What do you mean?
To manage a complex crisis, you need integrated data from statistical offices, social services, even education ministries. That's how you understand mobility, vulnerability, cascading social impacts. The digital system has to be agile enough to pivot immediately when a new threat is identified.
And that brings us to Policy 4, which addresses the inherent injustice of a global shock, international cooperation and innovation. How do we close those equity gaps we saw during the vaccine rollout?
This is critical. It involves sustained public support for R&D into novel threats and using mechanisms like the World Health Organization and the Pandemic Fund to facilitate equitable distribution of resources. But crucially, the focus is on innovation models that challenge traditional intellectual property or IP management.
So exploring things like technology transfer models.
Open licensing, patent pools, things that ensure life-saving technologies are made available in low and middle-income countries where the need is greatest, rather than being restricted by market exclusivity.
The Hospital at Home initiative feels like a perfect micro-example of this proactive design mindset in action.
It is. That initiative uses digital systems to shift the entire flow of care. It moves away from that restrictive brick-and-mortar hospital mindset. By remotely monitoring patients with sensors and telehealth platforms, doctors can manage complex care outside the overcrowded hospital.
It frees up capacity.
And resources for acute cases, while providing personalized data-driven care to people who can recover safely at home. It's a profound operational redesign, and it's enabled by technology acting as a lifeline.
And on a much bigger scale, that recent World Health Assembly agreement suggests a major step towards codifying this equity-focused framework at a global level.
It does. The WHA agreement represents a binding commitment to global resilience. It was designed specifically to fix the solidarity and accountability failures of the past. It includes pledges for expanding manufacturing capacity in different regions, establishing open research networks. But the key mechanism for equity is this proposal to draft and negotiate a pathogen access and benefit sharing system, PBS.
Okay, let's break down PABS. What does benefit sharing actually mean for a country that might not have the capital to develop its own vaccines?
PBS is about creating a legal framework where countries that provide pathogen samples or genetic data to the global system, which is data that's critical for developing diagnostics and vaccines, are guaranteed to share in the benefits that come from that.
And those benefits are what? Money.
They're multifaceted. It could be guaranteed product samples like vaccines or treatments for their own population. It could be funding to strengthen their local public health infrastructure. Or it could be essential technology transfer, allowing them to build their own local manufacturing capacity.
So it's an agreement that innovation has to be non-discriminatory.
It's a recognition that global health security requires cooperation, not competition, over basic biological data.
Okay, so the macro systems are finally moving beyond denial. They're trying to design resilience into the international infrastructure, recognizing that one nation's health is tied to global equity. But what happens when the decay isn't just in the administrative systems or supply chains, but in the entire political and economic model of the state itself?
And that's where we move from reform into, into radical creation. Because beyond corporate decay and national health fragility, you have many communities that are facing the wholesale collapse or paralysis of their governmental and infrastructural systems. The full macro system crash.
And the philosophical driver here is this core critique that the dominant global systems, capitalism and the nation-state model, they aren't solving the problems. They're actually the root cause of the problem.
Of massive economic inequalities, of sexism, of environmental destruction.
Yeah.
Yes. For these communities, waiting for traditional development or some kind of state intervention is the ultimate form of denial. They realize they have to seek alternatives to development.
Which requires a radical rupture.
A complete break with capitalist rationality. The aim isn't to create a replacement state, but to foster what's called a pluriverse, a diversity of new, sustainable, and socially just societies.
This brings us right down to the ground level of grassroots innovation, like that post-industrial town we looked at where the local government is just crippled by decline, crumbling roads, unreliable water, no economic future.
Exactly. When the state is paralyzed, that vacuum has to be filled by the community. And we see this with Elias, the former teacher in that Rust Belt town who started what we can call grassroots innovation. He understood that waiting for the state to rescue them was completely pointless. The focus had to be on creating robust alternative social and economic structures right now.
He started the time bank. People were exchanging services without cash. A plumber fixes a leak, and in return, his kid gets tutoring. And they built that solar-powered community garden. How does a time bank function as a radical alternative economy?
It fundamentally decommodified labor. The unit of exchange isn't the dollar, it's time. 1 hour of my labor equals 1 hour of your labor, regardless of what the service is.
So it creates a non-hierarchical value structure.
Absolutely. A brain surgeon's hour is valued exactly the same as a janitor's hour. This builds immense social capital and reciprocity. It ensures that non-cash interactions become the foundation of their microeconomy, which protects them from regional economic collapse or inflation.
And the garden provided food security and energy autonomy.
Right. It let them bypass the failing power grid and the expensive distant grocery supply chains. This innovation is born purely out of necessity, and it validates the idea that profound progress often comes from the micro-community acting as its own engine of survival.
And that micro-community model scales up dramatically when we look at geopolitical movements that are trying to fundamentally reject the state model itself. Something like democratic confederalism.
Democratic confederalism, which was heavily influenced by the social ecology theories of Murray Bookchin and then articulated by Abdul Öcalan, is the ultimate design for a stateless democracy.
Right.
It's an explicit rejection of centralized state power and nationalism.
And it advocates for a non-state political administration.
One based entirely on autonomous local self-governance.
What are the foundational principles of this stateless democracy?
The structure rests on a synthesis of 6 key principles. You have radical autonomy and direct democracy through local councils. You have political ecology, so sustainability is a core mandate, multiculturalism, a cooperative economy, and most centrally, feminism, or as they call it, genealogy, the science of women.
Genealogy, that's a central pillar.
It's the central pillar. The philosophical argument is that patriarchy is an ideological construct of the national state. And therefore, true liberation requires the complete dismantling of hierarchical male authority and ensuring that women have vital and equal roles in every single level of the organization.
That's a staggering commitment. The goal isn't just political self-determination, it's a total social revolution. So how is self-determination defined in this model, if not through national borders?
Self-determination is defined by establishing genuine grassroots democracy, by creating autonomous self-organization for every community, confessional group, gender-specific collective, and or minority ethnic group. The rejection of the nation-state means the focus is horizontal on autonomy and local councils rather than vertical, on creating a new central government.
And we've seen a systematic implementation of this project in North and East Syria and the area widely known as Rojava, or the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria.
The AINS is an extraordinary example of translating this theory into practice. This project systematically replaces these deeply entrenched hierarchical patriarchal authority relations with horizontal gender egalitarian structures.
How? What are the mechanics of that?
To achieve it, they instituted a mandatory gender balance. Every single administrative body, every council, must have a minimum of 40% female membership. And a co-leadership system is mandatory, where decision-making power is shared equally between a man and a woman.
So the co-leadership model is an engineering solution to power disparity.
It is. And furthermore, the administration defined itself from the start as a multi-ethnic social revolution. They recognized the region's diversity, so they actively sought to integrate Arab, Assyrian Christian, and Turkmen groups into the decentralized governance structure. This ensures the model is fundamentally anti-nationalist and inclusive from its very inception. Its resilience depends on social cooperation, not ethnic dominance.
There's a parallel dedication to building autonomy from the bottom up in Chiapas, Mexico, with Zapatismo. But there, the focus seems to be heavily on the educational component.
Zapatismo is recognized globally as a profound alternative to traditional development models, and it's built on political and territorial autonomy. But they understood a key principle. If you want a new society, you have to create new citizens.
So the vital building block is their autonomous education system.
which was implemented as an explicit, direct alternative to the official Mexican state school system. Its design mandate is to cultivate new subjectivities, new ways of thinking, of relating to each other, through what they call emancipatory education. It's about laying the foundation for Zapatista autonomy in the minds of the next generation.
So their biggest innovation isn't a new product or a piece of tech. It's the intangible practice of learning and resistance itself.
Precisely. The innovation is found in the self-organized collective practices that define their culture. This includes the highly political act of co-designing their own textbooks and educational materials, which explicitly counter the centralized narratives of the Mexican state
So they're writing their own history.
and their own future. It involves the self-management of educational projects by their good government councils and teaching children and teenagers the specifics of Zapatista territorial organization, not abstract civic concepts.
Which implies their learning methods must be fundamentally different from a state model.
Oh, they're deeply anti-authoritarian. Learning methods are often highly spontaneous, rooted in collective discussion, and surprisingly, they barely rely on traditional written knowledge. Education is structured around the philosophy of communality,
Communality.
conviviality, reciprocity, solidarity, non-hierarchy. And crucially, practical knowledge is generated not just in a classroom, but in the family, in the community assembly, and in the milpa, the cornfield. The milpa, where they grow corn, beans, and squash together, becomes this living physical metaphor for interdependence and collaboration.
It sounds like the connection between theory and practice is instantaneous. It's mandatory.
It is the defining feature of Zapatista education. The core philosophy is expressed in their mantra: receive the theory and do practice. What you hear, you have to do, you have to practice. This mandate ensures that the Zapatista struggle isn't some abstract political idea. It's directly linked to the daily material construction of autonomy. It equips the next generation not just to criticize the broken elevator, but to immediately start building a new one from scratch.
This deep dive has really spanned 3 distinct scales of systemic challenge, and what's so compelling to me is the unified nature of the successful responses. In the corporate world, you see the collapse of the old employment contract being met by ethical leaders who invest in human adaptability. They use proactive strategies like design thinking and those future skills academies.
And in global health, the fragility of national systems is answered by binding international cooperation and digital infrastructures that are explicitly designed for equity and real-time responsiveness, like that PBS mechanism.
Then in geopolitical struggles, where the entire state model is seen as exhausted or dysfunctional, that failure is answered by communities building entirely new structures of self-governance. They rely on things like the statutory gender balance and multi-ethnic cooperation of democratic confederalism.
Or the comprehensive educational autonomy and the communal practice that's inherent in Zapatismo.
The lesson across all 3 layers feels so clear. The moment a system fails is, in the end, less important than what we, as the active designers, decide to put in its place. And whether that decaying system is an organizational chart, a global supply chain, or a political infrastructure, the truly resilient solutions, they share a common, proactive DNA.
And that DNA rejects hierarchy in favor of horizontal relationships. It shifts power away from singular authority and moves it towards shared responsibility. And it fundamentally prioritizes human well-being and capability over that strict, inertial adherence to the status quo. The courage to build anew is what differentiates true survival from just comfortable denial. The most profound and transformative progress is the one that's already underway, built by those who simply refuse to spend another morning climbing 4 flights of stairs past a masking tape sign.